You're listening to Do That Well with your hosts, Brenda Brown and Karen Thrall, a podcast about real experiences and how to turn them into life lessons. Unscripted, honest, funny, genuine, and passionate. A series of conversations where we explore every aspect of human interaction and provoke each other to do life well. In today's episode, we are going to talk about being competitive, competitiveness, competitive nature, competition, things of that nature.
Oh, okay. And this is so interesting. The reason, full disclosure, is I just recently realized I'm competitive and I had no idea. Like I'm in my 50s, I have no idea that I was competitive. So I said to my daughter, Madison, I go, I think I'm competitive. She went, no. Like she was just like, really? Like I'm the last person to know. And then I told my son and his girlfriend Leah, and she laughed. Like I've known Leah for 3 years, and she laughed. Yeah, of course you're competitive. Like what? Like how do I not know this about myself? And there's a stigma, and I don't know if it was the environment where I was raised, but I always thought that is not a good thing to be competitive. So I was like, I'm not competitive. And I also had a stigma that being competitive means you're get mad if you don't win a game. Like, and I don't get mad as long as we're having fun. I love it. Like if it gets competitive, I kind of shrink back because I don't want to play anymore, kind of thing. So that's why I thought, well, I can't be competitive because I don't enjoy that thing. So, but now I'm totally competitive. And then I was talking to a leader, and she was talking about her competitive edge, and she wore like a badge of honor, her competitive edge, and how far it's gotten her. I'm like, oh, there's that word again. Like, and she says it with so much like zest and vibrancy. There's a whole background to this topic today.
No, it's so good. And we'll dive into this, I'm sure, as we continue our conversation. But I have a competitive streak as well, which I won't dive into right in full right this moment, but I also have a competitive streak. And in my past, that competitive streak, I think, definitely came along with some of the more negative connotations of the word competitive
Like
versus the things that just enrich us as individuals. So this will be a fun
story,
topic.
story, story.
Oh, I mean, as a small example, I even remember just playing soccer as a kid. And I wasn't very good at soccer, but that didn't matter and that didn't stop me from wanting to be the best. And so, forward, that's the position that you get if you're good in soccer when you're on these children's teams. And so that was the position that I needed to be, clearly, because that would mean I was the best. And I just remember like every day going to practice, I was always like, I'm going to win. Like I would look at the person next to me and be like, I'm going to win this. Whatever it was, a little race, whatever it was so that I could be at the top. And I mean, I was ruthless. Like I was this little tiny kid. I was so scrawny. And I remember I would always, what's it called when you like kick slide someone so that you kind of get the ball out from under
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
But I wasn't very good at that because, as I mentioned, I wasn't actually very good at soccer. And I knew that most of the time I tried to do that, I would actually just end up hurting somebody, but didn't even care because I was so competitive about it. So these are the ways that competitiveness can be negative. When
It's
you're just
so
telling other people you're going to win, or you're doing things at the risk of hurting other people because it means you're going to get out on top, and you're
and you
12 and you're ruthless. And
one of my Dylan's favorite stories is I think it was the sixth grade, and I was a parent, and we went to one of the Native Canadian kind of um, like retreat centers where we stayed for a few nights, and they learned all about culture, and so there were these games that were being played, and I think I was like a wolf in the game, and it was almost like flag football, and I'd see some of his friends, and I'd start running through the forest after them, jumping over trees, and they're screaming. They still talk about it today, the friends that he's still friends with. Like, your mom terrified me. They go, 'cause I was like, Dad, he goes, don't. And Dylan's like, really? You're not competitive? Really? Like, you petrified my friends, terrified them because I was like, and I was, running through the forest trying to catch them, but they loved it. Like, it was such an adrenaline rush. So I went, oh, I guess that would be a little competitive. But I want to learn. I want to learn how to do this well. Like, why am I so resistant to this? And I think it's because I don't have a good it's I don't have a good taste for it. Like, there's something that makes me shy away from it because I don't think it didn't I just never thought it was a good thing to have. But look at professional athletes. If they didn't have their competitive edge, and we admire them so much because of their competitive edge, and they wear it with a badge of honor because it's what gets them to the gold medal, it's what gets them to the champion ring. So I want to learn about this. And that's why when I said to you, can we do it on competitiveness? I want to, like, what is good competition? Because what if it unlocks something in me and the people listening? Like, what if we find out there's a really healthy way to do it and we get unlocked, and then all of a sudden our journey, it adds a new strength and a new element that's really healthy. Oh,
Yes.
there we go.
And of course, as we prepare for these episodes, we both go into research mode. So, as one does, I've found some articles that really resonated, and I'd like to share some little bits and pieces as we go throughout this episode from those articles, because I think that it, for me, really shed a lot of light on this idea of competition. So, if I may jump into one of
Yes.
those tidbits, push up my non existent glasses here. Um, and as you were saying, Karen, the word competitiveness, it just has such an ugly connotation in our
Mhm.
society. I mean, oftentimes when we think of people being competitive, we think of people that are greedy or envious or jealous, people that are narcissistic and have too much ego. But feeling competitive or being competitive, it doesn't always have to be about winning. It doesn't always have to be about getting ahead of somebody else. It doesn't have to be about climbing the ladder or whatever it may be. From what I've been reading out there, competitive feelings actually are natural, and every single person is competitive.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
there is not a person that is not a competitive person, at least on certain occasions. And the more we can recognize those competitive feelings that we have and think through them rather than just acting on them, I think that's like the part. Can you recognize it and process it for a moment rather than just acting on it?
Mhm.
That stopping point, I think, can help us a lot of the time. But there are two types of competition. So there's the competing to win, which is when you're competing against those around you. And then there's competing to excel. And that's like the good kind of competition. And that's when you're really competing more against yourself. And you might use the people around you as like a catalyst to inspire you to achieve that same thing. But rather than it being, I see what that person has and I want it, now I'm envious or I'm jealous or I'm mad at them or I'm going to gossip about them, it
Yes.
becomes, I see what this person has and I
Yes.
want it. And that's an admirable quality. And now, how can I take that and put it in myself and be competitive with myself so that I can obtain the same quality that this
Mhm.
person has?
Mm,
So I
I
thought
like
that was a
that.
very interesting
Yes,
distinction
I
to
like
make.
that a lot. I like that a lot.
Rather than having to pit myself against others, can I use this as inspiration? Can I use it to fuel my own personal development? So you are still being competitive against them in a sense, but I think it's about where you're directing your energy and your actions after that. And on that note, something interesting that I found when I was coming across, when I was researching this topic, are the different ways that our competition against others, when we're putting ourselves against others, can become negative actions. So I thought that this was an interesting way to look at it, because if we can identify when we're having a negative action to competition, then we can pull back from that and bring the competition back into a healthy place.
Mm.
Maybe that was my
Mhm.
thought
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And yes, this is great because along with this, because I'm really trying to figure this thing out in my life so that I can use it for good and really grow it in a good way. Uh, I'm trying to find all examples where I love it. And so another example I really love competition is Corey and I, when we go to the driving range, we compete. So we'll say, all right, whoever gets closest to that 75-yard marker, that 125-yard marker, and we just, and we get 5 chances, and it's just fun. So when he gets close, I'm like, yay, look, wow, great shot, that was awesome. And then when I do it, he's like, great shot. And so we're competing, but we're also really empowering each other, and it's actually improving my game because we're competing.
Yes.
And so there is that thing of, and we love it. So he was telling me, actually, he went to the driving range yesterday with his cousin, and they were doing it, and he said his game actually went up. His game improved because they were competing for this target, and they were also applauding each other for whoever got there the best. And I guess that's another reason why I love golf so much. It's that there's a self competition, but then there's this bantering, playful competition, and you're always happy for whoever gets the win. So
Right.
I'm thinking of these examples, that in my life where I want to implement that kind of competition. I'm all in, like, yes, count me in.
Yeah. And I think that is such a good example, the one you just gave, of this idea of the difference between competing to win or competing to excel. So if you're competing to excel, then that allows you to be more cooperative with those around you. And then you're also not denying your competitive feelings. Everything that I've read is that it's when you deny your competitive feelings that they start to manifest themselves in negative ways, because you're
Wow.
not just realizing that, like, yes, you are competitive, and if you can channel it into this idea that you're being competitive to excel and take it
Hmm.
away from that winning place, that seems to be a pretty big
Hmm.
mind shift to make.
Hmm. That is really great. So what I'm hearing is, when you start accepting whatever that area of competitive nature you have, when you start accepting it, and then you go, okay, I accept that this is in me, and I'm going to use it to excel, you're going to cultivate a very healthy relationship with competition. If you pretend you don't have it, or if you deny it, then that might be out of a place of insecurity, or a place of feeling lesser, or that, um, I'm going to lose, and I don't want to lose. Now you're cultivating a negative relationship, or an unhealthy, which could create toxic interactions and just all that. So that's really cool.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
You just summarized my thoughts more perfectly than I
No,
could.
well, not more perfect. Oh, are we competing? No, just kidding.
This is a competition, and
Oh.
you are excelling.
Oh.
If I may, I did want to touch on just a couple of the ways that our competitiveness can manifest itself negatively, because I think that these are moments that may resonate with you or with some of our audience. I know that there were a couple that really resonated with me, and that was when I went back to that childhood, like, oh, that was what I did. That that was what I was doing when I
Huh.
was
Wow.
being
Okay. I look forward
bad
to this.
competitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the ones that I came across was gossip. And I know that I have definitely been, I've done this. So if we are denying our competitive feelings, then we can start to actually distort the people around us through a negative lens, because
Mm-hmm.
since we're not accepting that we're being competitive, now we just start to like distort the narrative of what's actually
Mm-hmm.
happening. And so gossip can be an attempt to release or relieve like our anger or our cynicism that we might feel because of the fact that we're denying our competitive feelings. um so
So that's a check-in then, right? Like, if you find yourself talking negatively about people you love, or people or whatever, you might be feeling competitive right now. And then if you can recognize that, and then, okay, so how can I turn this gossip into a competitive edge,
right.
instead of shooting them down so that I feel better about myself? How about if I go, okay, well, my thing is, the other thing to, and maybe this is not the right time to say, but I've been using the word challenge accepted. Like, I'm doing that now, because I find it's like, okay, challenge accepted, and I'm making it fun, which is like, now I'm just doing a self competing, and it just makes it a lot more fun.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
gossip, you could switch gossip to challenge accepted instead of shooting down the other person or talking bad behind their back.
Totally. Yes. I really like that challenge accepted. Also because it reminds me of like Mortal Kombat or a video game, which really tickles me. But and also to add to that as well, it takes me back to a lot of conversations we have, this idea that things aren't black and white. So even our feelings towards people aren't black and white. And if you are finding that you're compelled to gossip about somebody or speak negatively about them, or things are being put through a negative lens, it's very likely that you actually have some things that you really admire about that person,
Mhm.
right? And so you can be happy for somebody because they have something you really want, and you can still hate them for it. I mean, hate's a strong word, but at the same time. And those two things can be held true at the
Mhm.
same time. So, for example, like you could be thrilled that your friend just bought a house and you're so happy for them, but you could simultaneously be like, ugh, I hope you get termites or something, you know. But if we can, like,
Or you could go, "Oh, but the way they decorate it is just I would never choose that color." Like, that would be a
exactly.
competitive, where if it was my house, I would have used these colors, or like that would might maybe show that you're feeling a bit competition, a bit competitive with them.
Right.
And
Right. So that's one of those cues to you, like you were saying,
mm,
Karen. Like
mm,
this might be more about competition and less about this other
mhm,
individual. So I
mhm.
thought that was an interesting example
Yes.
because I think that we can all relate to that, at least in one or two moments in our life where that's happened.
Yes. Mhm,
Another one, which goes into more of this idea of the competing to win versus the competing to excel, is just self denial. Um, when you have competitive feelings, but if you reject them, then instead of thinking something like, I really wanted that and I'm furious that I didn't get it, let's say it's a job that you were trying to go after, instead of this idea of, I really wanted it, I'm furious I'm getting it, that can turn into like, I don't even care, I never really wanted it. I'm just not even going to put myself out there anymore. Why am I going to keep trying? And so it becomes this self denial of what we really need because
mhm.
similar to
Yeah.
our conversation around anger, like competitiveness is there to tell us something about ourselves.
Wow. So, yes, so well said. Woo.
So,
Competitiveness is there to tell us something about ourselves. What t-shirt? Yes. Okay, so I have a thought on that. I'm thinking of two leaders that I coach. Again, I'm really in tune with now. One of them is a CEO of quite a large company. And we had a conversation, and I probably have mentioned this in the podcast episode somewhere in the past, where we were at a workshop. I was running a workshop, and I told her, I said, I don't, I'd rather be in second place than first place. And she couldn't, that didn't make any sense to her. Why would you put all that investment, all that work, all that effort to not at least do everything you can to be first? And if you don't, you didn't merit it, that's fine, but at least do everything you can to be first because you've put so much time and sweat into it. So when you said the denial thing, what is it about me that denies the opportunity to at least try to be first place? And that is an underlying thing. So I do struggle with self-denial quite a bit. I remember playing racquetball back in the day, and as soon as I was winning, the partner I played with, she would get frustrated. So then I would pull back and not win. I wouldn't win. And so I would, if there's something about I don't deserve it, or I don't merit it, or I'm not worthy of it. So I'll just go second. And anyway, second doesn't rock the boat anyway. If you go second place, you're not going to muddy the waters, and you don't have anybody mad at you. And so I do have that self-denial. So that made me think of her, and I look at her life, and we've been working together now for like 4 years, and I have admire so much what she's capable of accomplishing, and balanced. It's She's so balanced in how she lives her life. And it's very inspiring, but she does have that competitive edge. and she doesn't have that denial thing in her. That doesn't make sense to her. To like you put the sweat in, you put the hard work in, you go for number one. That's your goal, and you humbly accept if you're not. Like that's her framework, and
That's so interesting. I know I keep bringing us back to this, but I keep thinking about again this differentiation between the competing to win and the competing to excel. And I feel like in that example, when she said to you, like, why wouldn't you even want to try for the best? And what I like about that is it's not, the emphasis isn't being placed on don't you want to get first though. It's wouldn't you even want to try for first. So don't you even want to try to excel? Rather than putting that emphasis on don't you want to win, it's don't you
right,
at least want to try? Don't you at least
right.
want to try to excel? Excelling can mean winning, but it's just that small shift of looking at it as trying to get to the best end goal versus because you want to win that goal.
Hmm.
It's
Yes, I
it's a
like
really
it.
small
I like
difference. It's
it.
a really like small shift in your energy, but I guess the reason I keep coming back to it is because that was really like a light bulb moment for me looking back
Mm,
in my life and seeing those small shifts that I made for myself to become less of the bad kind of competitive.
mm. Do you find because you were so little, and I knowing you, I can because of all you've been able to accomplish in dance. Of course, you have a competitive edge because dance is a competitive. I mean, it's a small stage, and not very few players can be joined. You know, like it's like to be chosen is there's a slew of dancers that aren't being chosen when you're chosen. So I can see where you would need the competitive edge to excel in dance. What do you think? Because you're so little to have this frame. I'm going to win. I'm going to push you to the side. You know, I'm exaggerating. What? How does a child develop that? And now you're going, wow, hey, there's a better way of doing this. I do think they're innately born with a natural edge of competition, and they're just maturing it. Like it's raw. It's like, it's like mining, mining, refining gold. It's raw and it's raw state, and you refine it. Is it just as simple as that, or do you think it's upbringing, training, perspective? What are your thoughts when you look back at yourself?
Well, of course, I can only speak to my life and I'm not a psychologist, so these are probably some real half-baked thoughts here, but um I think it's nature and nurture. As we were saying earlier, I think every single person has competition within them. They all have a competitiveness within them. And when you're looking at kids, I would think that it has something to do with naturally having more or less competitiveness within you, coupled with the messaging that you're getting, whether that messaging is coming from parents or from kids around you or from teachers or from television. But I think that for myself in my life, when I look at when I was in a more negative competitive place, a lot of the messaging that I was getting from the people around me, it was about, being number one. It was, did you win? Did you get an A? Did you, or, are you going to win the spelling bee? And there was so much of that emphasis being placed on, are you the best? Are you number one? But it was always in relation to other people. It wasn't, are you trying your best?
So good.
It was, are you the best?
Wow.
Um, and the way that I just phrased all those things, it sounds like it was all my parents, but
No,
it wasn't all my parents. This is,
no,
this is school teachers. This
no.
is like TV. This is
Mm,
whatever it may be. And I think that's why that competition to win versus competition to excel. I think that's
mhm,
why that is such an eye-opening thing for me.
mhm,
Looking back and seeing, oh, I was being really reinforced to try and compete to win. I wasn't ever being told to compete just so that I was doing my
mhm,
best.
mhm,
And that was a shift that I made for myself at some point in life because I
mhm.
realized that it was unhealthy. I was doing things like gossiping about other people because I was jealous, or I would be really
Right, there's another
cynical
one.
of other
Yes.
people's behavior, like, oh, they shouldn't have done it that way. But it was just because I had to say those things to make myself feel like my way was the winning way, because that was the only
Mhm,
way I felt some sort of, you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? That was the way that I felt some sort of accomplishment.
Hmm. Do you think when people have a hard time accepting that they didn't win, what do you think that is? Like when they don't, when they create a scenario or a narrative that it wasn't fair. That wasn't fair, you know, they cheated or the referee or like this thing of no, that wasn't a fair win. What do you think that is? Like what causes people to adamantly believe there's no way they lost and they take it to that next level? What do you think? What causes that?
I personally think that has to do, at least in some part, with this idea of denying your
Oh,
competitiveness, right? Because that's one of those
yeah,
ways that it would manifest itself negatively, because you're
right.
not
The refusal to know that you lost or didn't
right, or didn't,
make come
you
first.
right, exactly. And so it's n- um denying that this competition is like so important to you, and so there's no way that your behavior or something that you did um would have made you fail, right?
Because and it's you're so and this is so it goes back to what you said when you see when you acknowledge that it's competition, your relationship with the experience is going to change because now you're in challenge accepted, you
Right.
know. But if you do not think it's competition and you believe it's principle, you believe it's justice, you believe it's all these things, then the win, like not placing first, is going to be it's devastating. And like I remember watching NCAA basketball, and it was the championship game, the final one. And the team that lost, because eventually there's only one team that can get the championship. And I watched this one player fall to the ground on the basketball court and cry and cry and cry and cry. And then I watched another one. His head went down. I saw like and just he just one sat on the bench, one covered his face with his towel, one isolated himself. And I'm watching, I remember thinking, this is so fascinating watching the team that didn't get championship. They were so discouraged because they poured invested everything into it. And watching the way they grieved not winning. And I just remember thinking that was so fascinating to watch the dynamics of devastation.
Right. And I do think as well, in those circumstances, sometimes when you're seeing people grieve because they didn't win, or if they didn't, that could still be healthy. And I think that's when we go back
Hmm.
to this idea of how do you act upon it? Like, what are your actions once that happens? Because, sorry, going back to this winning
I
versus
love it.
excelling thing,
Keep us on track. Keep us on track because that
but
is our takeaway
if
for
you think
today.
about it in that way, if I'm trying to excel and I'm trying to excel at a basketball game, I don't know basketball, so it's probably a bad example, but we're going to run with it. Um, and I lose the basketball game, so now I haven't excelled. So I think it would be perfectly acceptable and normal for me to have a mourning moment because I didn't excel. I
Mhm.
didn't do my personal best.
Mhm.
But then if that starts manifesting itself in anger or resentment towards the people that did win,
Yes.
that's the shift.
That's so brilliantly said. Yes, I love that. Okay, so that would be a healthy version. So we're not saying, and see, this is I'm soaking this in because I want to learn how to be competitive. I do. The bells. I mean, I'm hearing it everywhere, and I'm paying attention. I'm like, okay, this is a learning opportunity for me. I really want to stay on this track and figure out what am I supposed to learn from it. How can I grow? So I love what you said that you might still mourn. You might still get disappointed. You might still be sad. You might feel all those feelings, but does it turn into jealousy, bitterness, resentment, gossip, self denial, um, anger, uh, injustice, unfair, like that whole reaction um, that it turns dark, it turns
Mhm.
negative. Now you're on day. Now your competition is in a healthy place.
Right. for me, I think a lot of it is just recognizing, like accepting the fact that yes, you're competitive. Don't self deny, right? Like you are competitive, you're a competitive individual. And so when I find that these feelings of competitiveness are taking me into a negative place, I try and be aware of that. And what's like the real message? What can I actually take away? What is my competitiveness telling me right now?
Mhm.
Because I do think that, like many things, we talk about that nuance, that there's no dichotomy, it's not a black and white, there's a
No.
place in between. I think that's
Mhm.
also very important in this conversation.
Mhm.
Well, that is our time for the day on our conversation on competitiveness. And, we'll be back next week with an even better episode and we'll win it. Thanks for tuning in. We're Do That Well. Bye.